Hey there nation, welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we are back with another episode of Cheap Shots, episode number 36. On this episode, we're going to show you guys how to paint up a squad of Fiends of Slaanesh, both cheaply and quickly, and net you a grand total of $27.02 in order to paint up this unit using the Cheapskate method. At the same time, this method will also save you over $133 worth of savings by using the Cheapskate tips that we have in this video, as opposed to using the name brand paints and equipment supplied by other manufacturers. So you can see here, this is what your guys' unit will look like when it's all done. These are 3 Fiends of Slaanesh from the Wrath and Ruin box set by Games Workshop. You could also use these for Warhammer Age of Sigmar. So that being said, let's get this video on a roll and save you guys over $133 in savings. Alright, the first thing you need to do, of course, is to prime your miniatures, and the primer I like to use is Rust-Oleum Flat White Primer. It costs $3.99. You can get this at your local Walmart. Just do a real quick once over the entirety of the miniature, so that way you have a good base coat to work off of. The Rust-Oleum Flat White Primer does 2 things. One, it gives a white undercoat to make your colors very vibrant when you add colors to these miniatures, and secondly, it also gives a textured surface for your paint to stick on, so that way it stays onto your miniature and doesn't run off. So with that being said, once you get your primer done, you're ready to move on for your base coats. So the first base coat you should work on, of course, is on the flesh. In this case, I used Apple Barrel's Nutmeg Brown. It runs you 50 cents at your local Walmart. And the reason why is because I wanted a darker skin tone for my Fiends of Slaanesh. Most of my army has really pale to light skin tones within it, and I wanted to add some contrast to it. And since these miniatures are so large, I decided to go with a darker skin color on these guys. It just looked really cool. I just thought it would be a really nice contrast to the pink color scheme I wanted to work with. So because that, I just base coated all the flesh that's exposed on these Fiends in Nutmeg Brown. There is quite a bit of it. Primarily covers the torsos as well as the arms, also the upper portion of the thighs of each of the legs of these creatures. So whatever the parts that are in flesh that you want to pick out, just do 2 thin layers of Nutmeg Brown. So once we're done with that, the next thing you do is apply a dry brush. This time we're using Apple Barrel Flush. It's another tube that runs you 50 cents at your local Walmart. It's doing a real nice even just a dry brushing job over the entirety of the flesh portions that you painted up in Nutmeg Brown. What this does is it kind of keeps the Nutmeg Brown in the recesses of the miniatures, so adding some depth. At the same time, also catches the highlights on the miniature as well as the raised surfaces, and adds a lot of 3-dimensionality to your miniature as well. I really like this Nutmeg Brown flesh combo whenever I want to go for the darker skin tones, and as you can see, it looks really nice at the same time. Remember, when you do your dry brushing, always start off with a small amount first and then gradually build up layers of color, because it's always easy to add more to your dry brush effect. However, it's very difficult to take off once you guys have applied it. Alright, so now that you're done with all the flesh, the next portion you need to do is the next area of the miniature that covers the most area, and that's all the fabric in this case. In this case, I decided to paint it all in a pinkish color. I decided to use Light Magenta by Apple Barrel Paint for the base coat. It runs about 50 cents at your local Walmart. And the reason why I decided to go with this color is because a lot of people have this assumption that just because something is pink, it can't be dangerous. And I thought it'd be kind of interesting to have like one of the largest, most powerful units in my army have this bright pink color. I thought it'd be really cool to do that. So that's exactly what I did here. So you can see I did all the stockings for all the legs, as well as for the scales on the top of the heads, as well as the backs of the miniatures as well. There's also sleeves of cloth and fabric that's along the tails as well. So because of that, you need to add 2 thin layers of light magenta, and as you can see, you have like this really interesting finish. It contrasts very nicely with the dark skin. Just put 2 thin layers of light magenta, and once it's dry, you're ready to move on to a dry brush. So all the portions that you paint up in light magenta, you'll need a dry brush with Apple Barrel's Cameo Pink. It runs you 50 cents at your local Walmart. And all you need to do, of course, is just do a quick dry brushing along the scales, as well as all the fabric that you painted in light magenta earlier. What it does is that, of course, it highlights the raised surfaces of the fabric parts, as well as keeping the light magenta and the darker recesses as well. And does exactly the same thing with the scales that run from the top of the head, as well as down the back of these fiends. It kind of creates this kind of lighter pink tone, so you have like this nice little range of light to dark pink on the miniature as well. Add some really nice contrast while we're at it. Now granted, this will have the miniature give a very chalky and pastel effect, so if you notice that and you're kind of scared about it, don't worry. And the reason why is because we haven't washed these miniatures yet. When we go to the oil washing phase, it's going to take care of that chalky texture. It's also going to flatten the colors and blend them together. So if you're worried about that, don't worry, just keep on soldiering on. You're doing perfectly fine. So with most of the miniature completed, now it's time to work on the detail work. In this case, we're starting to work on the claws as well as the horns and talons of these fiends. So for that, I use Apple Barrel Khaki. It runs me about 50 cents. It's a nice neutral bone color that I use for everything that I use in my armies as well. So as you can see, there are all the spines and talons as well as the huge crab claws they have in their arms. I just kind of put 2 thin layers of khaki paint on top of it. It gives a really nice smooth finish. At the same time, also makes it look very bony with all the, like it's made out of bone. And the reason why is because I thought it'd be kind of nice little color to contrast the darker skin tone, as with the light magenta on the miniatures as well. Now the next step, of course, is apply a dry brush to all the parts you paint in khaki. And traditionally, I usually skip this phase for most of my miniatures whenever I add khaki color. But because these fiends are so large and their details are so prominent, I decided to kind of do this step as well. I use Apple Barrel's Ivory, runs at 50 cents at your local Walmart. Just do a quick dry brushing along the spines as well as the crab claws. Primarily the crab claws is what I focused on, as well as the talons and horns of these miniatures as well. And the reason why is, like I said, these miniatures are quite large, so because of that, these details, do stick out. And that's the reason why I add some dry brushing to it. The Ivory does a nice job of picking the highlights of all the khaki colors while leaving the khaki in the recessed areas, so it makes it look really, really nice and gives a really good finish overall. So with most of the larger portions of the miniature done with, now we start working on the finer details. In this case, we're working on purples next. So things like the loincloths, they're right in the middle of the front of the fiends, as well as some of the fabric along the length of the tail of these creatures. I decided to pick those out in purple. I use Concord Grape by Apple Barrel, runs you 50 cents at your local Walmart, and just put 2 thin layers on that as well. This purple does a really nice job on the contrasting with the loincloths that they're wearing, as well as the tail sections that are also covered in fabric as well. For example, you can really see it on the middle as well as the fiend on the right hand side as well. They have like these sections of fabric along the length of their tail, like it's done in different fabrics, and I thought that purple color would be a nice contrast to the light magenta that we use for these guys. So just put 2 thin coats of Concord Grape and you're ready to move on to a dry brush. So for the dry brushing color for that, we use Apple Barrel's Lilac Mist. It runs at 50 cents at your local Walmart. It's a nice fuchsia kind of purple, and I just did a quick dry brushing along all the parts that I did in Concord Grape in the miniature. So the loincloths as well as the length of the tails. As you can see, that does a really nice job of bringing out those highlights while leaving the darker purple color in the recesses of the areas. You just need to do that really quick. And once again, whenever you dry brush, always start with a light dry brush first and gradually add more if you want to later on. So continuing on the finer details on this one, I decided to use 3 colors for this part. I decided to use Delta's Serum Coat Tahitian Blue for the ponytail on the fiend on the left hand side, Apple Barrel's Kiwi for all the tongues of the creatures as well as Apple Barrel Wintergreen for the eyes of these fiends. Now the Tahitian Blue will run you 65 cents because it's made by Delta. Serum Coat, you can get that at your local Hobby Lobby, while the other 2, Kiwi and Wintergreen, those are from Walmart. They run you 50 cents each. And as you can see, that turquoise color does a really nice job of picking out the ponytail that's behind the back of the head of the fiend on the left-hand side. Makes it look really cool. While the Kiwi color does a really good job of illustrating the tongues, making them look all weird and purpley, weird and green, and make it look really awesome as well. At the same time, I also decided to use Wintergreen to pick out the eyes for each of the fiends as well. The fiends have 2 sets of eyes on each side of their head for a grand total of 4 eyes, and does a really nice job because the wintergreen contrasts nicely with the magenta as well as a dark flesh tone, so it's really prominent in the miniature and you can really see it as well. So once you're done applying those finer details, you're pretty much done with the miniature. Now it's time to move on to the metallics. So the very first metallic color you're going to use is Folk Art's Gunmetal Gray. Runs you 75 cents at your local Hobby Lobby, and this is for all the parts that are going to be in silver. Now, as you can see there, these miniatures, they actually have a lot of detail in terms of the silver portions of their bodies. These fiends are covered in these thin links of chain that basically runs across the length of their body, holding their fabric together as well as keeping their clothing on and armor on to the fiends. So they're all over the miniature as well. So this part was slightly frustrating to do. I'm not going to lie, just because if you make any mistake, you spill over the skin, you got to touch up with some nutmeg brown to make that happen. So you can see there, I just took some gunmetal gray and just ran along the length of chain all of these miniatures. I crossed the torsos along the back. It's primarily where you find these details. Also around the leg, the thigh of the one on the right hand side. It's got like this kind of like this leg ring around the thigh there. Also picked that on gunmetal gray as well. So you got to do 2 thin coats of this stuff to make sure you get a good proper finish. And also if you spill any on any of the skin, just touch up with some nutmeg brown. And the last two metallic colors I used on these guys, of course, were Folk Arts Pure Gold as well as Folk Arts Copper. Both of those run you 75 cents at your local Walmart. Primarily, you're using the gold for the most part on these guys. As you can see, there is quite a bit of gold on these miniatures. They got little charms and pieces of jewelry hanging off the chains on their bodies. They also have, like, you know, these little cuffs that go around their crab claws where their cuffs meet up with their arms. They have cuffs around their legs as well as their tails, their ponytails. They got all kinds of different little icons and little pieces of jewelry. So all I did with that is just pick out the layers of those with 2 thin layers of pure gold for that. Now the copper is for the Fiend on the right hand side. As you can see, the Fiend has like this length of round discs covering up the right hand side of its body. So all I did is just use copper for that to add some armor to the chest there. I just did 2 thin layers of that as well. And then once you're done with the metallics, the last thing you do is do some last minute detail work, and then we're pretty much done with these miniatures. Alright, so the last beat you need to use Apple Barrel's Crisp Apple, which runs at 50 cents, as well as Apple Barrel's Laguna, which also runs at 50 cents as well. And what these are for is for the jewelry on these miniatures, as well as the gemstones that are on some of these miniatures as well. So for example, if you look at some of the crab claws on these miniatures, they have like these gems that are embedded into their crab claws. I picked out those details in Crisp Apple just because that bright green would contrast really nicely with that bone color, so that's the color I use for that. Now, as for the jewelry itself, I used Laguna by Apple Barrel. It's a nice turquoise color. As you see, their contrast is very nicely with the gold embellishments as well. So for every single piece of jewelry they have, I just put a little dot of Laguna inside of it just to make it look like it was like a turquoise gemstone right in the middle of the gold, and it looks really, really awesome when it's all said and done. So once you're done picking out those jewels, as you can see here, you're pretty much done with the miniatures. Now it's time to go for an oil wash. So for our oil wash, we're using Mid-Wax Polyshades Mission Note color. Runs just $6.99 for a can of that stuff. What you need to do is take an old paintbrush, dip it into the poly shade, and just apply it like a wash all over the entirety of the miniature. As you can see, like I said before, it does a really good job with the finish. It also takes away that chalking appearance that they had earlier. And as you can see, it also flattened out the colors, also blended the colors in together into the various layers. So that way it looks really, really awesome as well. You got your darker colors in the recesses, and you got your highlights on the raised surfaces of the miniature as well. At the same time, you can see how this polish shade is crimped into all the recesses in the miniature as well, bringing out a lot of the details that weren't there before, and it's also muted down the dark colors, the bright colors that we use, and kind of muted it down a little bit to a darker shade there. A lot of people like to use Army Painter Strong Tone for this step, but personally, that stuff, I mean, it's a great product, but it's just too expensive, especially since Mid-Wax Poly Shades will do exactly the same thing and only cost you a fraction of the price. So as you can see here, it looks really, really awesome so far. Now, this next step is probably the most difficult one, and that's where you just basically have to play the waiting game. My suggestion to you is to wait 24 hours to let this stuff dry and cure before you start working on it again. And the reason why is because if this stuff is still sticky and you start manipulating this miniature, you could rub off large sections of paint and really screw up your finish on this, and you got to start all over again, which is something that nobody else wants to do. So my suggestion to you is wait 24 hours to do that. For me, I paint my miniatures mainly in the evening after work, so I just painted it on one evening, washed it, let it cure and dry the entire day, and then return back the next day in the evening again, and it's all ready to go. Now this next step is of course optional. My option for this one is to varnish your miniatures in a Krylon matte finish, which costs you $5.99. I don't like that shiny candy coated look that the poly shades does to your miniatures when it's done drying and curing. I like it more muted that way, so because I just spray with some matte finish, as you can see here, it does a really good job bringing out all those details so that way you can see it, and it just looks all kinds of awesome right now. These things look all grimy, and they also look really dangerous, and they also have like bright colors. It just looks really, really awesome when it's all said and done. So now that we're done, of course, matte varnishing the miniatures, the next thing you need to do is work on the bases. So the base work on this, of course, is exactly the same base work I use for all the miniatures of this Legion Slaanesh army, and that's kind of like this purple Realm of Chaos Warp Zone effect. So because of that, you use 2 layers of Concord Grape on the bases, just put 2 thin layers on top of the sand. Now, if you're wondering how the texture was done with those bases, I always have videos in my cheap shot that show you how I do my texturing. All I do is I just add a thin layer of wood glue on top of the bases, dust it with some sand that I get from a sandbox in my backyard, and then of course once that dries, I then wash it with a mixture of water as well as wood glue to create a sealant, and it's a really cheap and cost-effective way to make texturing for your bases. So as you can see, I just add 2 thin layers of Concord Grape on top of that, and then ready to move on. So once that Concord grape is done dry, the next thing you need to use, of course, is Apple Barrel's Granite Gray, which runs you 50 cents at your local Walmart. It's a nice, bright gray that's almost white. That's another thing about it, but at the same time, there's enough gray on there just to make it a little bit darker. So all I do is, of course, I just take that, do a quick dry brush on all the Concord grape portions to create this ashy, burnt out warp zone effect, and it looks really, really awesome when it's all done. So once you let that dry brush dry up, next thing you do, of course, work on the rim of the bases. Alright, so the last thing we do, of course, is use Anita's Acrylics Gray, which runs to 65 cents at your local Walmart, and just do 2 thin layers of the gray along the rim of the bases. The gray is a nice neutral color that also blends in very nicely with the purple, and at the same time has enough contrast to show that there's an actual base material, and then of course the top material as well. It also looks really nice with the rest of the miniature too. And as you can see there, it looks really, really awesome. The gray is all finished. And once again, here's the end result that we showed you at the beginning of the slides. As you can see, these fiends look absolutely fantastic with their darker skin tone. They also have that bright pink look to them with some purple as well. It just looks really, really awesome, like something out of a nightmare from the Pleasure Palace of Slaanesh, and they're ready to bring rot and ruin to the battlefields of the old world. So now that we're all done talking about exactly how the Cheapskate method works for this, let's go and talk about exactly how much it would cost if you decided to buy all your paints from Games Workshop Citadel line as well as Army Painter. So we're going to show you exactly how much that would cost, and then show you how much of a savings you'd have in difference if you use our Cheapskate method. So that being said, let's get that portion going. So this is the list of materials you need to use if you were to paint this up using Citadel paints as well as Army Painter. First of all, you need to buy a can of Corax White Spray, which runs to $17 to be your primer, and then you need to buy a tub of Bugman's Glow to do all the best base coating for the flesh, runs to $4.55, and a tub of Cadian Flesh Tone to dry brush that flesh, which also runs you $4.55 for that. Next, for all the pink materials, you need to buy a Screamer Pink as the base, runs you $4.55 for that, and then dry brush it in Emperor's Children, which also runs you $4.55 on top of that as well, to create that, light pink, dark pink effect. After that, you'll need to pick up all the parts that are going to be in bone, so you need to use Morghast Bone, that runs you $4.55, and then dry brush those portions with Longbeard Gray, which runs you $4.55 for that as well. Now, for all the fabric that's going to be purple, you need to use Gene Stealer Purple. Runs at $4.55 for that tub, and then dry brush it with the color Lilac for the lighter purple. Runs at also $4.55 as well. Now, for the ponytail for the fiend on the left-hand side, you need to buy a tub of Baharoth Blue, which runs you $4.55. And for all the tongues, you'll need to buy Moot Green, which runs you $4.55 for that. And then for the eyes, another tub of Gauss Plaster Green for $4.55 for that as well. Now, for the metallic parts, for all the parts that could be for the chains on this miniature, that should be the silver parts, you'll need to use Lead Belcher, runs to $7.80 for that. And then for the gold portions throughout the miniature for the armor as well as all the jewelry, you'll need to buy Retributor armor, which runs to $7.80 as well. And for the fiend on the right hand side with the copper plating protecting its right hand side of the torso, you'll need to buy a Screaming Bell, which runs to $7.80 for that as well. And then of course, for picking up the jewelry and the gemstones on these miniatures, you need to buy a tub of Hellion Green as well as Temple Guard Blue, which runs to $4.55 for those as well. Now then, to do the quick paint method, you will need to buy a can of Army Painter Strong Tone, runs you $32 for that, so in order to do the oil wash for that. And once it's dried, and if you choose to put a matte finish on it, you'll need to buy a can of Munitorium Varnish by Citadel that runs you $19.50 for that. And then lastly, of course, we got to work on the bases. You would use the Gene Stealer Purple to do the base work, and then you'll need a dry brush with Ulthuan Gray, which runs you $4.55 for that. And then you'll need to rim the bases in 2 thin layers of Slaanesh Gray, which also runs you $4.55. Now, assuming you had to go out and buy all these materials from Citadel as well as Army Painter, we're talking about a grand total investment of $160.15, as opposed to my Cheapskate method, which only runs you $27.02. So if you take the $160.15 from Citadel and Army Painter and you subtract my Cheapskate $27.02 from it, we're talking about a grand total savings of $133.13, which you can use for anything that you like, or save it and not spend it at all. It's entirely your choice on that one. So you can see there, saving you over $133 with my Cheapskate method and getting a beautiful tabletop result for your guys' Fiends of Slaanesh, and at the same time getting it done quickly and also cheaply. So that's going to do it for this one, you guys. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the latest, greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's going to do it for this one, you guys. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out and stay classy.